Only good-looking people on this call? No.
Only,
That's
and
it. Only.
only that. This is how we select our guests. We just look at their
Yeah.
pictures and we say, yeah, that's it. Good to go.
I'm glad I qualified.
You're qualified.
Hello. In this episode, we speak with Phyllis Shacter. Phyllis is the author of the book Choosing to Die. The book is a personal story about her journey with her late husband Alan and his choice to die by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, otherwise known as VSED or VSED. The reason Alan chose to do this was he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and he wanted to end his life as conscious and organically as possible and to reduce his suffering. In our conversation with Phyllis, she talks about the process, how it impacted Alan and her, and how it has changed how she lives now. We understand that this subject matter can be polarizing and controversial, but it is a subject that is being spoken about more frequently and something we didn't want to shy away from. Whatever your views, we'd love to hear your opinion, so please leave a comment on YouTube, Facebook, or email us via deathhangout.com. Now, to make sure you don't miss any episodes and to get updates on what we're up to, please sign up for our newsletter at deathhangout.com or click on the button on screen. Now get ready for this episode, Choosing to Die, Right or Wrong?
I'm always asking the same question, and I don't want to ask this question with you. Actually, you'll be the very first one. I'm usually asking this question about what is your relationship with death, all this kind of stuff, just to open the conversation. But I don't want to do that now. I really want you to talk about Alan and your relationship with Alan, your husband, because I think this is a beautiful story.
I love talking about Alan. We had an extraordinary relationship. Anything was possible in this relationship. We had known each other for a while and had shared friends in common. And because of the circle of people and friends in common, I think we had a lot of values in common also. And we were both at a time in our life. We were just ready to say yes to somebody. I was just turning 40. Alan was just turning 50. In the first conversation with him, I really did know that we were going to be together for the rest of our lives until one of us died. It was just this deep knowing in my heart space. I just knew it. And the reason I knew it was because the feeling that I had when we were talking, I'm taking myself back now to that first conversation in a living room. And when we were talking, it was so easy to talk to him. There was no resistance on either one, from either person. Our lives moved forward rather quickly. It didn't take long before we were living together and assuming a life together. I believe what is so important about our relationship is that we both came to this relationship with a very similar value of love is an act of cherishing. Meaning that if you cherish someone or something, you will grow to love them. It might be your child, it might be your mother, it might be your motorcycle. Think about the things that you love in your life and how you take care of them.
Guitars for me. That's it.
Right?
I love guitars. Sorry, I'm just imagining this like.
Could you even imagine not making love to your guitar and not taking care of it? No, do you understand what I'm saying?
I absolutely understand that,
Okay.
But I'm French as well, so I have dirty mind. Sorry.
Okay, that's what we did. There wasn't one night in 26 years that I went to bed angry with my husband. Was I ever angry? Of course I was. We had our misunderstandings and whatever, but they got taken care of right away. And underlying that was such a deep love. And we were always thinking about the other.
So you were living together. Then you discovered that Alan had not only Alzheimer's, but also cancer, right? So you have these things happening almost at the same time. And so you were like very, as you just mentioned, in love, together. And suddenly that happened. Can you describe us this from there? What happens?
I want to say that when we're in relationship with somebody else, we bring the baggage of our whole history with us. So Alan didn't have a fear of dying at that point in his life, really. I did. I had the fear of losing him, and I had the fear of my own death. We were coming from very different perspectives. So it's through the journey that we took together that I have made peace with death and with my own death. Now that is his biggest legacy to me. So when he got cancer and had Alzheimer's, it was unimaginable. I can't even put into words what it was like to receive all that information. The cancer needed immediate attention. His surgeon actually told us that he was going to die a painful death within 6 to 12 months if he didn't have 3 surgeries. And he also had Alzheimer's. So we weren't talking a lot at that point about the Alzheimer's. We were addressing how do we prevent a painful death. We knew, although the surgeons denied this, we knew that if he had any surgery, he would have ended up with a great deal of heavy medication that would have affected his brain, made it worse. He most likely would have ended up in a nursing home. He did qualify for the Death with Dignity law in Washington State. We're one of 6 states that have the Death with Dignity law. And he did qualify because the surgeon said, you are going to die a painful death in about 6 to 12 months. He and I were both very knowledgeable and comfortable with using alternative healing modalities. And we had been doing that for many years. And so we had the courage to take another route. And it worked.
He basically was cured from cancer. This is what happened.
4 months when we went back to the surgeon, he literally said the words that Alan had visualized in his mind. I can find no cancer. And it never came back. He couldn't even take another good biopsy because there was no tissue. There was no bad tissue there. It was such clean, healthy tissue.
However, the Alzheimer was still there. So cancer was gone and Alzheimer was there.
That's correct. And we thought that maybe he would get a few more good years because his body now, his brain wasn't healthy, but the rest of his body was. And I mentioned this in the book. There was a week where we just saw it was just getting worse. And we just held each other and cried most of that week. That's what I remember. We began to move forward in how he and was going to deal with this and how I would support him through it.
The point you made there, Phyllis, about the legacy that Alan left for you in that where you used to be sort of, if you like, terrified of death, and that's not there anymore. And there was one bit, I actually wrote this down because I just in terms of it capturing it, it's something that Alan wrote. He says, I'm comfortable and at ease with everything. I just feel great all the time, even when I'm tired. I'm present all the time. I'm happy all the time. And he says, I didn't feel this way most of my life. Before, I always felt burdened by all the things that I thought I should be doing, and I'm not worried about that anymore. How have you changed since you moved from that fear of death to where you are now?
By the way, the quote that you just read that's in the book, it's one of my favorite quotes, and it's really what he said. And it's really true that for about 6 months, I was like a student in a classroom taking notes. He would say things, and I literally would write them down, and I'd go put them in a file. As soon as I became aware that my mother was going to die, which I don't know when that happened, 4 years old, I don't know, that she would no longer be there for me. I had a wonderful mother who loved me very much, and I loved her very much. It was very hard to let go of her. I believe I began to grieve her death once I became aware of death. And then at that point, I think I began to grieve my own death. My own death felt like the words that have come to me are suffocation and annihilation. It always felt like I'd be gasping. Like a pillow would be put over my face and I'd be gasping and I'd be going out of this existence just in a horrifying way. And what I watched with Alan was this peace that came over him. Did it mean that he wasted a whole life living differently? No, I think what he expressed about all of us running around, trying to get things done, having stories in our mind about the way we think things are, that's how I believe most of the Western culture lives. And he went into a deep place of gratitude for the life that he had. And that's where I do my best. I'm doing my best to live that way now. It's an acceptance. I'm not fighting it anymore, and I'm just living my life. And I don't have the same sense of everything is so urgent. It doesn't really matter anymore. Do I do this? Do I do that? It doesn't matter. I am confident and clear that I want to share this message about our story.
Actually, let's go back to the message, if you don't mind, because this is what the book is all about. You are an advocate for SVED or VSED. I believe there's the two versions here. VSED is voluntary stopping eating and drinking. I'll tell you what I told you just before is I was very, very reluctant to have you on the show. Very honestly, only because of that, stopping voluntary of eating and drinking. That was, wow, to me it was something which was, in my mind, very difficult to deal with. And I realized that it was my fear. I was fearful, I was scared about this subject, this topic. I think it was John Walsworth who sent us 3 mails. He sent me 3 mails to say, well, you should talk to Phyllis. She's an extraordinary woman. You should talk to her. You should talk to her 3 times. And I ignored him 3 times. And then I said, okay, we are doing this podcast for a reason. We need to discuss about death. So even if I'm very reluctant, let's talk to Phyllis now. And I read your book. You're very kind, and you sent us your book. And I totally changed my mind, radically. By reading your book. To me, this SVED or VSED was at first seems to me as torture, almost, when in my mind. And when I read your book, I was just like, wow, that's so natural. There's something so compassionate about that. Even so that actually, I'm sorry, I'm taking a long time here, but I needed to express that.
Yes.
I had this call with my sister who lives in Australia. And we were chatting, and I said, well, I'm doing my podcast. And she asked me, so who you'll have? And I explained, okay, I will have Phyllis. And this is her message. And my sister was just like horrified as well, just like I was at the time. And I said, no, it's fine. It's actually, I was advocating, actually, what your message was. So I took a very long time, but just to tell you that this is, I think, you can have this visceral reaction at first when we hear about this story. So now I would like you actually to explain what it's all about, this SVED or VSED.
As you said, VSED stands for voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. I want to clarify, I'm not an advocate for VSED. I'm an advocate for expanding end-of-life choices. Okay. I'm an advocate for conscious dying. I'm an advocate for preparing to die, whether that we prepare a week before or throughout our whole life. That's what I'm an advocate for. I'm not telling anyone what to do, nor do I want to do that. But do I want people to go through their life knowing that they have choice, and that if they can have a gentle and peaceful death, that's good? Yes, that's what I want. And what I am saying, if done properly, VSED, which is a way of saying it, VSED, is one of those choices. In my state of Washington, the Death with Dignity law does not apply to Alzheimer's or most neurological disease, because you have to be in the last 6 months of life, be mentally competent, and be able to self-administer the medication. Well, Alan would not be mentally competent in the last 6 months of Alzheimer's. I felt, and he and I talked about this, that he was probably a few months, 3 months, we don't know for sure, though, from the point of him no longer being mentally competent and being able to follow through with his decision, because he had to remember why he wasn't eating and drinking. A key component is having the right support, medical support. caregiving support. So Alan actually had the legal right to say to his doctor, I don't want to be very aware of what's going on. Kind of just give me enough medication, not to make me unconscious, but just so that I'm nice and sleepy and drowsy, right? Initially, when he started talking to his doctor months before he made this decision, he told her that that's what he wanted. But when the day arrived, he actually said, I want to be as conscious as possible. And so in a very compassionate way, she stayed one step ahead of him and kept him physically comfortable so that he wouldn't suffer, but that he would have an organic, natural death. When I think about expanding end-of-life choices, I think about us all exercising self-love. I believe that if we educate ourselves when we are your age, when we're younger, then we can move through our life, maybe with a lessened fear, knowing that we can have a compassionate death, that we will have the right support.
So just on that, there was and it's linked to that. I mean, in the book, you said like this, that, and I said not just VSED, but elective death. Like you said it's saying yes to life, because what immediately comes up for a lot of people is when people think of elective death or anything like that, then they relate it to suicide. And you said elective death is saying yes to life. Could you just elaborate on what you meant by that?
When we think of the polar opposites, whether it's hot, cold, light, dark, they go together. We can't have one without the other, right? Same thing, life, death. They're part of a continuum. They're not absolutes. They're part of a continuum. Okay. Yeah. Now, you brought up the word suicide, and I do want to read one quote from the book. Can I show you the cover of the book on the Skype?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, can you see that this is the cover? It's a little book, but I want to read that one paragraph because I can't even tell you how many times people asked, is Alan committing suicide? This is a legitimate question, and I believe it is important to be careful about our language. Personally, I'd like the word suicide to be eliminated from our vocabulary when we speak of VSED or death with dignity. These are not suicides, but rather elective deaths. Suicide is secretive, often violent, outside the natural order, woefully ill-considered, and usually devastating to others. It is saying a giant no to life. By contrast, Alan was saying yes to life up to his last breath on his terms. His death was peaceful and completely in rhythm with the natural order. It was a deeply considered decision based on self-love, peace, and compassion for himself and for those around him. Alan's plan and decision was not secretive, but shared with many who loved him. He died not alone, but surrounded by love. He was grateful for the good life he had lived and grateful to have the choice to VSED.
I found that powerful when I read it. I found it even more powerful when you just read it out there, I think. And that's why I asked that question, because it is something that's going to come up anytime. There's a lot of fear around it. Again, in all different religions will put a different slant on that as well. So I think it's just important it was important for just to cover that with you.
Right. And, in writing this book, I'm very open to any spiritual path, any religion, and people have to be comfortable and in alignment with their own spiritual beliefs and religion with regard to end-of-life choices. Nevertheless, we can all learn how to expand in a compassionate way our notion of what that means to expand our end-of-life choices.
Can you tell us, how this process went? How is it for him,
Once he made the decision, and he made it apart from me, he actually never said to me, is this okay with you? He knew, because of the kind of love we had for one another, that no matter what he chose, I was going to support him. For example, I did say to him, if you choose to go end up in a dementia facility, I will promise that you will have a visitor every day. It won't be me every day, but I promise you will have a visitor. Okay, so he made the decision to VSED, the rest, then the responsibility fell into my lap. I didn't have a Phyllis to go to get advice. I didn't have a book, Choosing to Die, to go to get advice. So I'm an intelligent woman. I'm a compassionate woman. I began to know that I had to have good medical support. He and I had both been talking to our doctor on separate occasions about his decision. So when our local hospice said they would not support him through this process, and some hospices will, ours would not, I went to her and she immediately said, then I will come forward and I'm going to help Alan. So I had to have the medical. I had to have people in the house. I did not want to be the one. I don't have the training. I did not want to be the one tending to his body. He was very clear. He wanted his body to naturally break down in an organic death. That's why he chose VSED. So every day there were changes, and it's all documented in the book, what happened every single day. And his body very slowly began to break down. He never complained of hunger, never. On, I think it was the 5th day or the 4th and 5th days, he did ask me for water both times. And so I didn't know if he remembered exactly why he wasn't drinking water. And so I explained to him why he wasn't eating and drinking. And then I gave him a choice. I had to. It would have been illegal for me not to do exactly what he wanted. If I withheld any of it, I would be an accomplice in murder. I said to him, you said you don't want to eat and drink because you said you don't want to live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. So then I gave him a choice. Do you want the water, or is it okay if I just spray mist of water into your mouth? We took such good care of his body throughout this process. So whatever he was experiencing, we were trying to alleviate the symptoms, whether it was thirst or his body not getting too dry, or making sure that he wasn't sitting in any kind of urine, or whatever, that he wasn't going to get bed sores, that his heels were elevated so they wouldn't get dry and sore, that he was turned regularly. This was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It's not as if I was going through this process cool, calm, and collected the way I'm describing it to you now. I was in a heightened state of anxiety because I was projecting my own fears about death, about losing my husband, about not having that partnership anymore. I had a lot of fear and anxiety.
I mean, it's you're describing now how you felt. I mean, in the book as well, you actually said because an alternative option was the sort of the lethal drug choice, and you said you yourself thought it was easier to watch for 9.5 days than it would be to watch for 10 or 15 minutes. What's the difference for you between those two?
So that's a good question. The difference for me is that if he had done like a lethal injection, he would have been there, we'd be loving one another through our presence, and then he'd say, I'm ready now, and then boom, he'd just be gone. There would be no transition. It would be such a shock to my organism. Whereas I was able to watch every day he progressed. And he, got, less cognizant. He got weaker. Everything started slowing down. So I could see he's really going to die. And every time the doctor came, she explained, this is what's happening now. So at one point, she turned to me and said, Alan's at the point now of no return. If he changed his mind, which he could have done during the earlier days, if he changed his mind and we took him to the emergency room now, there's no turning back. There's nothing they could do for him. I was anxious. I was sad. Not for him, for me. For me, as selfish as that sounds. I was anxious and very, very, very sad.
The way that you describe, this death, which is, you said it's organic or very natural kind of death, things breaks little by little. I cannot help to think that, with the parallel, the speed that we are living today, this kind of speed and very quick and very fast. But here there's this kind of slowness, there's this kind of, you said the whole entire process was 9.5 days. To me, there's a wisdom in that, in this kind of elapsed time almost. Would you agree with that?
I think that's so astute. Your observation is very astute. Yes, there was complete presence around what was occurring. That was all that was occurring in Alan's life and my life. Nothing else. There was nothing else that I had to do other than, sleep a little and nourish my body with a little food. There was nothing else other than helping to shepherd this person who I loved to a peaceful passing. We don't even have time. In the speed of our lives today, we don't even have time to nourish the thoughts that really are the most important to us.
I have actually a question in my mind. I had this question since the start, actually. You know what made me love your book? It's actually at the very beginning. You said something about you and Alan, about your relationship. You said that you laughed a lot. Laughter was something like so big in your life. You were just constantly laughing at each other, like all this adventure that you had. And laughter humor is one of my biggest values. This is what defines me. And it's kind of strange, but and Keith, I assume, is the same. But there's death and humor. And my question is, do you laugh now? Do you have laughter and humors now that you have this?
I didn't laugh for a long time after he died. I really was in a very, very deep state of grief. I do have laughter again in my life, not in the way that I did with Alan. It was almost like a magical part of our union to have the degree of laughter that we had. I don't know if I ever will again. I definitely don't take anything, though, as seriously as I used to. Nothing.
That's great.
So, and I have a lot of joy in my life. I mean, my life is very different now. I may be in another relationship again. If I do, it will be very different. I mean, I don't know. I'm just letting it all unfold with grace.
One question I just want to ask is the bit that I loved in the book, and the reason I think it resonated with me, I remember reading a book many years ago called Tuesdays with Maury, and yeah. the thing about the living funeral, and that's always fascinated me. It's like why everyone comes together after you've gone? Why not do it if you could do it beforehand? And again, all those things that aren't left unsaid, that celebration of life with the person there. I mean, it's how was that experience?
It was such a joyous evening of total celebration. We didn't have a lot of stories around it like, oh, this person has to be there. Oh, that family member must come. It was like we opened it up to our friends, our family, our community. And whoever showed up, we invited a lot of people. And it was just completely joyous. Alan literally was able to make fun of himself when he would stumble on his words or he'd forget a thought because he had Alzheimer's, he'd laugh, And an interesting thing is because I think of the Alzheimer's, he mostly made reference to the most recent parts of his life, and he went into some far back memory. But for example, I was the one who talked about our relationship. He didn't talk about that, and that was fine. I talked about that. We talked about the celebration of life ahead of time. He had notes in front of him. It was so joyous. There were a few tears, but there was a lot of gratitude for a life well lived. People could walk up to Alan and hug him and look at him in the eye and say what was meaningful to them. And he got to take all that in. And, this was so meaningful for him in helping him. I just thought of this, in helping him to complete his life. Because one of the ways that he prepared to die was taking care of some lifelong, lingering emotional issues. that he had in his life. And some of them had to do with love, from others. And he was able to do that. And I think the love that he received at the celebration of life helped him move forward with his decision in a more dignified and meaningful way.
Again, please support the show by signing up at deathhangout.com or clicking on the subscribe button on the screen.